There have been many flops on Broadway. Every hardcore theater goer has their favorite bad show. For me, it's the one we're going to be talking about today. The flop to end all flops. The worst Broadway show in the history of the art form. The show that closed in 3 days. Carrie the Musical. But before we get into it, thank you very much for watching. Remember to please like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. It helps me with the algorithm, and it helps me make more of these videos for you guys. Make sure to click the bell for more videos like this. Our story starts not in a stage, but in a double-wide trailer in the middle of nowhere, Maine. Stephen King is now a prolific author and horror icon, and I must confess, I am a little biased. I had a huge Stephen King phase in high school. I have read each one of his books at least twice, and I have read it 17 times, skipping that one scene 16 times. Yes, I know I am a madman, and no, I am not mentally well. However, early in his career, Stephen King was an English teacher and part-time writer for men's magazines such as Playboy. Then one day, as he was cleaning the girls' showers at the high school he was teaching at, he got the inspiration to write a scene about a girl being bullied in these showers. His two main inspirations were two girls he had met in school who had been bullied mercilessly for standing out, as well as an article about teenage girls having telekinesis after achieving their first period. He wrote the scene, then crumpled it up. His wife, Tabitha King, found it crumpled up and told him to finish the scene. He was at first hesitant, not wanting to waste time on a book he had no clue how to market, and choosing instead to keep writing for Playboy. However, she insisted. It took him a little over 2 weeks to finish the book. He sent the copies to a few publishers, not really expecting anything big. Then, one day while teaching, he got an announcement over the intercom that his wife had an urgent phone call. He knew that if his wife had an urgent phone call, it meant one of two things: that one of his kids had broken a limb, or somebody bought the book. An editor from Doubleday Publishing sent him a telegram saying, quote, "Congratulations, Carrie officially a Doubleday book. Advance $2,500. The future lies ahead." The book was a monster hit. So few authors had ever captured the horrors of teenage life so fluently. To this day, it is widely considered one of the best books in King's monstrous catalog. Shortly before the book was published, the manuscript was sent to a reader named Lawrence D. Cohen, who was a reader for a New York film producer. It only took him 5 pages to become enthralled with the book from an English teacher in Maine. Nobody else in his office thought it would be a hit. After 2 years and a move to LA, he was hesitant to gain a similar position for another producer. Until that producer offered an option for Carrie on the spot, and he took the gig. Cohen and director Brian De Palma offered to take a closer look into teenage life through the film's pacing and framing, often showing serene mise-en-scène, which is then thrown into chaos. The film would become a hit as well, coming out with $38 million in box office on a budget of only $1.8 million. Shortly before the 1981 Oscars, Larry Cohen and Michael Gore went to see the new production of Alban Berg's opera Lulu, which follows a high-class mistress femme fatale as she spirals into madness and is eventually killed by Jack the Ripper. As the pair left the theater analyzing the show musically and dramatically, that's when Gore had a bright idea that would change both of their lives forever. That was the night that Carrie the Musical was born, as a what-if conversation between two struggling producers trying their damnedest to find a property to turn into a musical. The story lends itself to both a dramatic opera in the moments between Carrie and her mother, and a pop opera feel when dealing with the high schoolers. Cohen ran the idea past King, who fell into such a deep silence that Cohen thought he had hung up. King then gave the go-ahead on Carrie the Musical, remarking, quote, "If they can make a musical about a dictator in Argentina or a murderous barber on Fleet Street, Carrie as a musical makes enormous sense. Go ahead." On the other side of the country, lyricist Dean Pitchford was turning down project after project due to their generic origins off of the success of Fame, which was taking over the airwaves, a musical film about high schoolers trying to make it big. Then one day, he gets a call from Cohen, who pitched him on the project. Pitchford felt weary about the financial insecurities of the project, but nonetheless felt passionate enough to hop on the next flight to New York. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we call foreshadowing. Now that the background is out of the way, there is one big issue. None of these men had ever written a piece of theater before. They quickly started to realize that the theater format was going to be rather difficult. By 1984, the three had put together a show that was largely book-driven and put together via fax machines and phone calls. Roughly 30% of the production was dedicated to spoken dialogue. Gore collected an eclectic score that combined electric power ballads and the more contemporary MTV-style pop opera that was becoming a force on the stage. After finishing Act 1, they decided to put together a star-studded table read in August. They put on an intimate reading of the show at 890 Broadway, with Michael Gore playing piano, Cohen reading the stage direction, and Pitchford directing. Annie Golden read for Carrie, Maureen McGovern as Carrie's mother, Liz Calloway as the head bully Chris, and Laura Dean as Sue. After a week of having the actors interact with one another and sing the songs, the three minds behind the project believed that they had something to be proud of. This would be the only moment in the productions where things ran smoothly. I hoped they savored it. A number of producers were at this table read, with nearly every producer in bigwig in town wanting to get in on the ground floor. They were drawn to the frank reality of the show with a promising grandiose set design. That would change later. The team eventually wound up working with producer Fred Zallo and two producers who were chomping at the bit for a true horror musical, Barry and Weissler. The producers put up $5 million with a goal of opening 2 years later in 1986. A series of interviews with heavyweight directors began shortly thereafter at the headquarters of International Creative Management in New York. The first through the door was Mike Nichols, whose work includes Barefoot in the Park, The Odd Couple, and The Graduate. The team played him a few songs live and then showed him the hour-long recording of the cast recording. He applauded their work and told them it was going to be a great hit, but that he wasn't going to do it. Then Bob Fosse came through the door. Yes, the Bob Fosse. He wanted the show to be a lot darker in its tone and more dance-focused. I don't know what else they expected with Bob Fosse, but the team wanted it to be more song and dialogue focused. The fact that they didn't let Bob Fosse do whatever the hell he wants to do goes to show the fact that these guys have nothing about theater on their resume. The parade of A-list directors came and went, either turning the project down or being rejected by the trio. Then, talent agent Sam Cohen brought up another name, Terry Hans, who was in town with a History Cycle double bill. The trio responded with a resounding hell no, as they had seen his one and only musical directorial effort, Poppy, and walked out at intermission. He showed up, and after reaching the end of the tape and his second pack of cigarettes, he agreed to do the project. Zallo and the Weisslers, the money behind the project, would drop out after they told the director to think Grease. Now, in Hans's credit, the producers meant the musical Grease. Hans thought they meant ancient Greece. The director came back with sketches of togas, so naturally they left. So the trio had to find new money to back the project. Got the choreographer from Fame and a German producer with shitloads of cash, and off on their merry way they did set. This is starting to sound like a bad idea, right? 3 guys who know nothing about theater and a director who the 3 guys first off didn't want because his only directorial effort of a musical they walked out of, and the guy with all the money and all the experience in theater saw it was going to be a shit show, and they still decided to keep with the show. Stephen King and Brian De Palma both understood that a great villain can buy you a lot of slack from the audience, and the trio behind the musical understood this too. Initially, they wanted Tony winner Betty Buckley to play the evil mother. When they told her that they were turning Carrie into a musical, she simply asked why. Same, Betty Buckley. Same. She had been involved with the original 1976 film as the gym teacher and was hesitant about the project, but she had listened to the tape and was blown away. However, after she auditioned, Terry Hans had a bizarre conversation wherein he questioned her quality as a person. In turn, she began questioning her involvement in the project, and negotiations came to a standstill. Hans changed direction and started pursuing Golden Age of Broadway legend Barbara Cook for the role. Her response to being offered the role was, "Are you kidding me?" She had normally played the younger, starry-eyed protagonist and never the evil mother. She was talked into it as it would be a new start for her. During all of this, the search for Carrie was underway with over 600 people auditioning for the role. Then, 16-year-old Lindsay Hatley entered the audition. She sang On My Own from Les Mis and absolutely destroyed the audition and callbacks and was offered the role on her 17th birthday. She had flunked out of theater school and entered the audition caked in makeup to cover her young age. The show was put together for a 3-week run in the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford-upon-Avon. Reason being, as it would be a government-subsidized way to have a Broadway tryout. The director tried to sweet-talk the skeptics by saying that they were going on tour, with the first stop conveniently being in Broadway. But the RSC Theater is totally our home. For the RSC company, this was an all-in make-or-break venture after their monumental hit with Les Mis, which they only received $18 million for off of a gross of $2 billion, due to the other producers getting a far larger cut than the theater. This would be the follow-up book musical for the company. Though they had no money to lose, their reputation was at stake. The show was trying to be a mega musical and a tragedy in 12 tableaus, while ignoring the fact that these mega musicals had little spoken dialogue. If you remember, most of Carrie is dialogue. So the dialogue started getting cut, which means the numbers started tumbling on top of one another, with little to no explanation or connection between them. Another issue being that Hans had never attended an American high school, which was to be the focus of the show, so the high school scenes were pushed onto Debbie Allen's shoulders. Then there's the set design. One of the best aspects to the book and the movie is how the setting feels realistic. It feels like we are strolling down the halls alongside the characters. It's almost like Robert Weissman's high school. Also, the realistic setting emphasizes, via contrasts, the supernatural telekinesis of Carrie, which interacts with this world heavily. But the musical didn't do this, because fuck you, that's why. Instead, they opted for a white sanitized box that offered very little to look at other than the shiny happy people dancing on stage. Isn't this supposed to be a horror musical and not MTV? Turns out they were going for this aesthetic instead of going for the source material. Oh, you wanted the creepy religious imagery inside Carrie's house? Fuck you, you're getting a wall, a door, and the actors. Fuck you, give us your money. Every other mega musical had an identifiable set piece. Les Mis had the barricade, Starlight Express had the bridge, Cats had the tire, Phantom had the chandelier, Carrie had the staircase, which would lead Carrie and her mother to heaven. Wouldn't it make sense if the big set piece was the prom? Nope, fuck you. The costumes were a strange mix of headbands, spandex, and togas, which seemed like Doc Brown vomited on a time machine, sewing machine hybrid, and this is the horseshit that came out. The writing team saw all this and still tried to be optimistic. That was until the director said they couldn't sit in the auditorium and instead would have to meet with him in the lobby after the show. This meeting would then turn into a meeting with Hans's assistant instead. The tension between the creatives escalated. Now you must be thinking that a good crew can save your ass. In truth, they can. To put it simply, there's a reason Orson Welles hired people more experienced than himself for Citizen Kane, because they would have a better idea of what they are doing than he would. However, because this is production hell, it's safe to assume that this was not the case. In fact, it was much worse. The crew had never put on a Broadway show before. The pacing was all over the place. Design was atrocious, an inexperienced crew, a shitty director who had his head so far up his own ass that you would need the jaws of life to begin to excavate his cranium, and an inexperienced writing team, all combined to create one glorious shit show. To make things even worse, the show did not even have a workable second act, and they had a very tight schedule, meaning they had to finish the damn show while they were rehearsing it. They had to focus on deadlines instead of making a good show. Then, Terry Hans and Barbara Cook would go to war over creative differences, with Cook damn near leaving the production. I wouldn't blame her if she did. The show was not ready for opening night, plain and simple. Everyone knew this, but when you make a turd, it's gotta stink. Do you want to know what is the most insulting part of all of this for me? The damn blood drop. The most important part of the story to get right. The climax. The thing that makes Carrie lose her shit and ace everyone in the damn town. Initially, the crew decided to do it how the listener assumed they'd do it. Like they did it in the movie, but for real. However, this caused a lot of problems. Number 1, it is very slippery and the actors might get hurt. 2, Carrie's mic would cut out due to being submerged in cornstarch. And 3, it was very complicated to get right. So listener, take a wild fucking guess what this intrepid crew of dipshits did. Guess. You got your guess? Good. Still not as bad as what these poor bastards did. They had Chris and Billy run up on stage and pour a cup, not a bucket, a cup of pig's blood on Carrie, completely ruining the shock of the moment. Holy hell, how do you fuck this up that badly? This is after they sing a song about killing several pigs to get this blood, but meanwhile only using a glass of it. The absolute shit show behind the scenes kept brewing up until 15 minutes before opening in February of 1988. Sadly, the show was a sellout weeks before opening, so this wasn't gonna be a quiet failure. This was going to be a giant wet fart on the theater scene. Reportedly, Barbara Cook left Hans an axe with a note saying that he deserves this axe for butchering the show. The night was a disaster. Instead of screams of terror, there was laughter and cringing. A mixture of togas and corn syrup-stained white stares left Larry Cohen in disbelief as if he weren't there for the entire process. Before performing the number Evening Prayers, Barbara Cook got set in her place a little too early, which resulted in the giant wall almost coming down on top of her head as she was being raised on a platform. She was almost decapitated on night 1, and the fact that is only a side note is hilarious to me. After almost being decapitated, she stormed over to Hans and said that after the Stratford run was over, she was leaving the show. I'd call that fair. Good for her. Turns out, no one told the German producer Friedrich Kurtz until he read about it in the paper the next morning. Betty Buckley was brought in to save the show, because if it weren't for her, everyone would be screwed. She and Cook are the only good guys in this story. Shout out to them. Somehow, the show limped its way across the sea and fell face first and exhausted on the steps of the Great White Way. In an effort to avoid people asking them how the show was going, the writers would become recluses as they recoiled in horror from the show that had gotten away from them like Dr. Frankenstein to his monster. Unlike other Broadway shows which started in the West End, meaning they had buzz in town with Carrie coming in from Stratford-upon-Avon, it meant that there was no real buzz. Somehow, Carrie cost $8 million with none of that money going into the production design. I'm guessing because Phantom had that same budget. The show started its previews in late April of 1988. After the final scene, with both leads covered in blood, they were met with silence. And then a chorus of boos. Lights came up for the curtain call, and half the audience cheered, and the other half hissed. Then it became a hit. Buzz had spread around the city, with some people going multiple times and showing up in costumes like it was the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But this wasn't the Rocky Horror Picture Show. This was a shit show. Opening night was on May 12, 1988. The bipolar roller coaster of teeny bopper song to ballad to MTV pulp back to power ballad 11 o'clock duet was a strange mix of tones. Some loved it, some hated it. Most had no clue what was going on. The audience sat in silence at the end and started booing, followed by another split reaction. Frank Rich, one of the most powerful critics, wrote a damning review of the show with the first line reading, quote, "Those who have the time and money to waste on only one Anglo-American musical wreck on Broadway this year might well choose Carrie, the new Royal Shakespeare Company co-production at the Virginia Theater." Before the Saturday matinee, Kurtz called the whole team together and gave a rousing speech that the critics be damned and that they were running the show. They all rejoiced. Meanwhile, Kurtz got on a plane and escaped New York like his name was Kurt Russell, never to be heard from again. Once the cast got back from their dinner break, they had found a closing notice on the door. On Monday, his producer partners found that Kurtz had screwed everyone over by pulling every dollar out of the accounts and closing them. By Tuesday, the writing was on the wall and they had no choice. The show had to close. After the final performance, Betty told Lindsay it wasn't their fault and that she was going to have a great career. The cast album was never recorded. On May 15th, 1988, the show closed. There have been many shit shows on Broadway, several of which we might cover in the coming weeks. But there is none quite like Carrie. From start to finish, this was a bad idea. Inexperienced people making a Broadway show from a book that probably shouldn't have been a Broadway show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. This was one fun episode to research and record. I just want to say thank you for coming to the end of this, if you made it to the end of this. And if you did, please make sure to comment below an episode suggestion if you have one. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.